There is a type of silent suffering that many people carry but rarely manage to name. It is the uncomfortable, almost suffocating feeling that arises right after you dare to say a simple word: no. I can't. I don't want to. I'm not available. A direct, necessary boundary, and yet followed by a disproportionate weight, as if you have committed a moral failure, as if you are betraying invisible expectations that hover over your head. This video is for those who have felt that weight, for those who have found themselves in a spiral of guilt after trying to preserve themselves, for those who struggle to set boundaries even when everything inside them screams for protection. The guilt of saying no is not natural. It is learned. It is the result of emotional engineering built over years, often since childhood, that subtly and constantly teaches that a person's worth is directly linked to their ability to serve, please, and be available. From a young age, many of us learn that love and acceptance are rewards granted only when we obey, when we say yes, when we put others' needs above our own. And this learning takes deep root. As adults, we carry this emotional inheritance without questioning it. We continue to say yes to avoid conflict, to maintain relationships, to not seem selfish. And the most tragic part, we do this even when saying yes destroys us inside. But the truth is different. The guilt we feel is not a sign of empathy. It is a sign of programming. Brené Brown, a world-renowned researcher for her work on shame and vulnerability, states that the guilt of setting boundaries is deeply linked to toxic shame, an internalized belief that we are only worthy when we are useful. In other words, that our worth is conditioned to how much we can sacrifice for the good of others. This distortion leads many people to believe that saying no is an act of aggression, that prioritizing oneself is a lack of love, that protecting oneself is being cold, insensitive, selfish. And so we go on, exhausted, resentful, emotionally drained, but still saying yes, with a smile on our face and a knot in our throat. What this video proposes is a break from this perverse logic. It is not just about learning to say no, but about understanding why it has become so difficult. And most importantly, recognizing that the guilt you feel was never yours. It was placed upon you. In the next few minutes, we will dismantle, layer by layer, the psychological and social system that makes you feel wrong for simply taking care of yourself. We will understand why so many people feel emotionally obligated to accept everything, even when it costs them their peace, their energy, and their mental health. And even more importantly, we will show you how to break free from this emotional prison without losing your sensitivity, only gaining autonomy. Because saying no is not being harsh, it is being free. If this introduction resonated with you, stay tuned. What you will hear next may profoundly change the way you relate to others, and most importantly, to yourself. The guilt we feel when saying no is rarely questioned. It arises as an automatic reflex, as if it were a natural reaction to any attempt to preserve our emotional integrity. But the truth is that this reflex was not born with you. It was carefully planted. To understand why it is so difficult to set boundaries without feeling guilty, it is necessary to comprehend the origin of this emotion. Shame. According to Brené Brown, guilt is often intertwined with toxic shame, a type of shame that does not say, "I did something wrong," but rather, "I am wrong for wanting this." It is this shame that makes us believe that by putting our needs first, we are being bad people. From an early age, we learn that being a good person means being helpful, docile, submissive. That saying yes is a virtue, and that refusing is synonymous with rejection, rudeness, selfishness. This distorted association between boundaries and morality is not accidental. It is a tool of social control. The culture of personal sacrifice is fueled by a perverse logic. The more you negate yourself, the more you are valued. Children are praised for yielding, for sharing even when they do not want to, for giving up their desires to please adults. The problem is that this supposed generosity, when forced, does not teach empathy. It teaches obedience. It teaches that you are only worthy of love and approval when you are available to others. Thus, shame becomes an emotional control system that follows the individual throughout their life, preventing them from recognizing their own needs as legitimate. In adulthood, this programming manifests as chronic guilt. The person feels they need to justify their boundaries, explain each no as if they were committing an infraction. They believe that refusing a request is failing as a friend, partner, or child. And when they try, even with effort, to establish some kind of barrier, the feeling that arises is not relief. It is guilt, as if taking care of oneself were an act of betrayal. The most devastating part is that this internalized shame causes us to stop trusting our own judgment. We begin to see self-care as selfishness, emotional protection as weakness, assertiveness as aggressiveness, and in the process, we become easy targets for emotional abuse. Because those who fear rejection for having boundaries are easily manipulable. But it is important to understand, shame is not a moral compass. It does not indicate what is right. It merely reflects what has been socially accepted. And often, what is accepted by society is precisely what dehumanizes us. The good news is that by identifying this shame as a control mechanism, you can begin to deactivate it. Recognizing that the guilt for saying no is a conditioned reflex and not a moral truth is the first step to freeing yourself. But understanding its origin is still not enough. It is necessary to look at the environment in which this programming took root. This is what we will explore next. How conditional love in childhood shapes adults who do not know how to preserve themselves without punishing themselves for it. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Toxic shame does not arise from nowhere. It is carefully shaped within specific contexts, often invisible to those immersed in them. The most determining environment for this is childhood. It is there, in the early years of life, that we learn, implicitly or explicitly, which parts of ourselves are acceptable and which need to be hidden in order to be loved. It is also there that many of us are initiated into the logic of conditional love. Conditional love is subtle but devastating. It occurs when the child realizes that they only receive affection, attention, or approval when they meet certain expectations, when they are good, helpful, well-behaved, when they do not disturb, when they say yes, when they do not assert their own will. Conversely, by saying no, by expressing frustration or refusal, that child is ignored, reprimanded, or emotionally punished. They learn, therefore, that being authentic is risky, and that putting their needs first can mean rejection. This type of learning is not rational. It is visceral. It is etched into the body, the nervous system, the automatic emotional reactions. A simple "I can't" in adulthood can trigger an unconscious alarm of abandonment. After all, at some point in childhood, saying no meant losing love. And what does a child do when faced with this choice? They give in. They mold themselves. They transform into what the environment demands they be. And over time, they forget who they were before that. The programmed mind is born from this adaptation. The adult who grew up under conditional love tends to become someone highly sensitive to disapproval, a person who avoids conflict at all costs, who feels the need to explain themselves all the time, who offers more than they can give, and then blames themselves for feeling exhausted. All this to maintain a bond, even if that bond costs their own emotional health. And the cruelest part? This pattern repeats itself in romantic relationships, friendships, and work environments. The person finds themselves surrounded by demands, always saying yes to avoid losing the other's affection, without realizing that they are, in fact, losing themselves. They have become accustomed to negotiating their authenticity in exchange for acceptance. And this exchange, over time, exacts a very high price: anxiety, resentment, burnout, depression. But there is something even more disturbing about this cycle. Often, the people around them not only benefit from this compulsive availability, they demand it. They manipulate, pressure, and engage in emotional blackmail when a boundary is set. And the victim of this dynamic ends up believing that the problem is them, that they are being too harsh, too cold, too selfish. This distortion needs to be dismantled, and for that, it is necessary to reveal the truth that no one dares to say out loud. The people who make you feel guilty for saying no are, most of the time, those who do not respect you. This will be the focus of the next part, and it may be one of the most liberating and uncomfortable truths you have ever heard. There comes a moment when you need to look brutally clearly at your relationships and ask yourself, why do certain people react with hostility or drama when you simply say no? Why, when trying to protect yourself, are you accused of being selfish, insensitive, or ungrateful? The answer is as uncomfortable as it is liberating. Those who make you feel guilty for setting boundaries do not respect you. They exploit you. That's right. There is a type of person, often close, sometimes even dear, who does not want a relationship based on exchange, but rather on unrestricted access to your energy. For these people, your presence, your help, your listening, and your emotional availability are resources they believe they have the right to consume. Not out of conscious malice, but because they have been conditioned that way. They benefit from your inability to say no. And when you finally try to break this cycle, they react as if you are committing a personal betrayal. But the truth is that a healthy no is just a choice. And emotionally mature people know this. They do not demand explanations, do not dramatize, do not retaliate with silence or veiled criticism. They understand that the freedom to say no is what makes any yes truly valuable. Consent only exists where there is the possibility of refusal. True care only exists where there is respect for the other's boundaries. Now, observe the opposite behavior. See how emotionally immature people react to your no. They raise their voices. They use emotional blackmail. They play the victim. They try to turn the situation around so that you feel guilty. These reactions are not mere hurt feelings. They are attempts to re-establish control. They are unconscious manipulation mechanisms to restore the old balance where you yielded and they received. It is painful to recognize, but it is essential. If someone only remains in your life while you are saying yes to everything, that person does not love you. They love what you offer. And love that depends on your constant self-annihilation is not love. It is dependency. It is use. It is domination. Brené Brown is emphatic in stating, saying no is a complete sentence. When you feel obligated to explain, justify, or apologize for a boundary, you are, without realizing it, trying to convince the other that you still deserve affection, even while being inconvenient. And this is the exact reflection of the toxic shame we mentioned earlier. You believe you need to pay an emotional toll to exist with dignity. But freedom begins when you stop negotiating with those who should not be at the table. When you recognize that respect is not begged for, it is demanded with presence. And that the true test of a relationship lies precisely in how the other reacts to your no. However, to sustain this new positioning, it is necessary to break the habit of justifying yourself all the time. It takes courage not to explain, not to soften, not to apologize for preserving yourself. And that is exactly what we will talk about next. the power of no as a declaration of identity, and why stopping justifying your boundaries can be the most transformative act of your life. Saying no without justifications seems like a simple, almost trivial gesture. But for many people, it represents an internal revolution. After all, we have been trained since childhood to soften, mitigate, justify every boundary we set. Sorry, I'm just really tired. I would love to, but I already have another commitment. It's nothing personal. It's just that, and with each explanation, we dilute the strength of our own decision. The subliminal message we convey is clear. I know I'm wrong for refusing, so let me try to redeem myself with a good reason. But here is one of Brené Brown's most impactful lessons. No is a complete sentence. No commas, no justifications, no guilt, just no. And that no, said firmly, without aggression, but with clarity, carries extraordinary power. It asserts that your energy, your time, your presence are not bargaining chips. They are sacred, and that you do not need to emotionally kneel every time you choose to use them wisely. When you stop justifying your boundaries, you send a profound message, not just to others, but to yourself. I respect myself enough not to explain. You recognize that your choice has intrinsic value, even if the other person disagrees. This is not arrogance, it is dignity, because dignity is not negotiable. It is not defended, it stands in silence. Of course, this will be uncomfortable, especially for those who are used to your permissive version, always available, always conciliatory. But that discomfort is not your responsibility. If someone interprets your no as a lack of love, perhaps that person has never learned what it means to love without control. And if someone demands explanations to accept your boundaries, perhaps they have never recognized you as an individual, only as a resource. Interrupting this cycle is painful. You will feel tempted to give in, to soften, to over-explain. You will want to protect the other person's feelings, even when the other has never protected yours. But this is the moment of firmness, the moment to remember that every time you say yes to avoid conflict, you are saying no to yourself. And each no denied to your own well-being accumulates an emotional price: resentment, exhaustion, self-sabotage. Stopping justifying your boundaries does not mean being cold or indifferent. It means abandoning the need to convince the world that you have the right to exist as you are. It means trusting that your integrity does not depend on others' approval. And above all, it means understanding that true respect begins when you stop begging for it. But recognizing this is not enough. To sustain a no with courage, you need to free yourself from the mental system that has been installed in you since childhood. A system that associates self-care with selfishness. And it is about this reprogramming process, about how to break this conditioning and relearn to put yourself first, that we will talk about in the next part. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Breaking away from an emotional programming is not an impulsive act. It is a deep psychological process that requires awareness, courage, and practice. Saying no without guilt is not just a change in behavior. It is a reconstruction of identity. It is the deconstruction of a system that, for years or decades, taught you that your existence only has value if it is in service of others. And believe me, this system does not go away quietly. It screams, it resists, it sabotages, but it can be deactivated. As long as you are willing to confront everything you believe to be true about yourself. Reprogramming begins when you realize that the guilt you feel when protecting yourself is not a moral compass. It is a conditioned reflex. And like any reflex, it can be reconditioned. But this requires a direct confrontation with the internal voice that accuses you whenever you set a boundary. That voice that says, you are being selfish. You will disappoint someone. You will lose their love. That voice is not your essence. It is the echo of an emotional past that still tries to govern your choices in the present. Brené Brown talks about the importance of vulnerability in this process. By having the courage to preserve yourself, you inevitably expose yourself to criticism, rejection, and judgment. And it is in this space of emotional exposure that your strength begins to emerge. Vulnerability, as she states, is not weakness. It is the measure of your commitment to the truth. And the truth is that you were not born to live negating yourself. You were conditioned to do so. And that conditioning can be broken. This process requires practice. And like any practice, it starts with small acts. Saying no to commitments you do not want. Not responding to messages when you are exhausted. Stopping the explanation of decisions that are intimate and sovereign. By doing this, you begin to rewrite the circuits of your brain, literally. Neuroplasticity is not a metaphor, it is science. Every time you uphold a boundary, even in the face of guilt, you are creating new neural pathways, reinforcing a new internal narrative. A narrative that says, I deserve to preserve myself. But this journey is not just individual. When you start to position yourself more clearly, the world around you also reacts. Some people will respect it, others will distance themselves, and some will confront you directly. This is expected, because by changing your stance, you alter the power dynamics in your relationships. And those who benefited from your silence are now disturbed by your voice. Therefore, emotional reprogramming is not a comfortable path, but it is the only path to authenticity, to inner peace, to relationships based on choice, not obligation. Saying no firmly without guilt is an act of personal revolution. It is you telling the world, I exist even when I am not available. I matter even when I say no. But there is still one last truth that needs to be faced head-on, one that may hurt more than all the previous ones, but that also carries the power to liberate once and for all. And it is with this that we will conclude this video. If someone punishes you for having boundaries, that person never loved you. They only loved your availability. Let's talk about that now. The moment of truth arrives. The part that almost no one wants to hear, but that everyone at some level has already felt. Because when you start to respect yourself, to set boundaries, to say no without bending, something inevitable happens. Some people distance themselves, others get irritated. Some fall silent, as if your boundary were an offense, and still others try to manipulate your guilt, making you believe that you are being ungrateful, cold, insensitive. But the question that needs to be asked is simple, direct, without anesthesia. If someone punishes you for having boundaries, did that person ever love you? Or did they only love your availability? This distinction is crucial. Genuine love recognizes individuality. It values space. It respects autonomy. Those who truly love you do not demand that you nullify yourself to prove that love. They do not charge for unrestricted access to your energy. They do not turn your refusal into a personal attack. On the contrary, those who love you embrace your no naturally. They understand that preserving oneself is not abandoning the other. It is simply choosing consciously. But when the relationship is based on utility, not affection, your no becomes an obstacle, an annoyance, a mirror that shows the other that they no longer have control over you. And then, punishment comes disguised. Rejection, silence, criticism, drama, emotional blackmail. All to restore the old role you occupied, the role of the one who always said yes. But the truth is that if your lack of availability destroys the relationship, That relationship was already corrupted from the start. Brené Brown teaches us that the most authentic relationships flourish when both parties have the freedom to say no without fear of losing the bond. That is the true test, because love that does not survive freedom is not love. It is possession. It is need. It is addiction disguised as care. Saying no is not rejecting anyone. It is refusing the role of martyr. It is freeing yourself from the idea that you need to be constantly useful to be worthy of affection. And it is also a powerful filter, because when you start to take a stand, you will discover who truly loves you and who only loved the domesticated version of you. The version that smiled while suffering, that accepted everything to avoid conflicts, that blamed themselves for simply existing with their own desires. This revelation can be painful, yes, but it is also liberating, because in place of these relationships based on control and guilt, you will make room for more mature, lighter, more real connections. Connections where you can be whole, imperfect, human, without having to negotiate your dignity. So, if this video spoke to you, comment down below, "I choose to respect myself," because this simple act of writing is already a commitment to yourself. And share this video with someone who also needs to hear this truth. It might be the beginning of that person's liberation too. And above all, keep watching. The next video is just as important as this one. It delves even deeper into the journey of self-knowledge and breaking patterns that imprison. Your transformation started here, but it doesn't end here. I'll see you in the next one.